Joanna Hayter is Executive Director of the International Women's Development Agency based in Melbourne. IWDA focuses entirely on supporting women and girls. Joanna, welcome to In Her Shoes.
Thanks, Suzi.
Thanks for joining us. Tell us how you got to be in this role.
It's about a 30-year journey. I began in social justice and peacemaking work and moved across into international development in my early 20s and found myself working in Southern Africa for a decade as a field officer, involved with refugee camps, with war zones, you name it. It was quite an extraordinary beginning in development. But then moved, following that decade, with my family to Vietnam for a few years and then followed on to Burma for a few years. Today I find myself back in Melbourne, leading an NGO in Australia, which is wonderful, and it feels like it's been a good 30-year journey.
Great. Well, welcome back to our country.
Thank
and I just want to acknowledge you for the contribution that you've made, obviously, to people all over the world already. Now you're working with the International Women's Development Agency. Tell us a little bit about the work that they do.
The International Women's Development Agency is a non-government organisation. We join many Australian agencies in our overseas development work. However, we're the only organisation that focuses entirely on women and girls. From the moment we arrive in the morning to the moment we leave at the end of the day, our work puts that lens, which is looking at gender equality and women's empowerment.
What sort of discrimination are you seeing in the countries you work in that are areas that inhibit those women's ability to progress?
Look, I think it's not just country by country. I think there's a global picture that we're trying to address here. Women in this world do 2/3 of the work and they produce half of the world's food. Women only have access to 10% of the world's income and 1% of women in this world own land. This is not acceptable. We see that more than 1 million people living on $1 or less a day in this world, and 60% of those people are women. We see that 1 in 3 women will suffer from some sort of violence in their lifetime. We see that 2 out of 3 of the world's 900 million illiterate people are women. And we see that worldwide, more than 6 out of 10 people working in family enterprises, working without pay, are women.
Tell me, you've chosen to, because this is a big issue, but you've chosen 6 main areas in which you feel you can help. Tell us about those areas.
I think we'd call them the platforms of our work. I mean, they're the foundations that ground us. They're the foundations that give us focus. We look very closely at women's civil and political participation. We look at women's economic empowerment. We look at sustainable livelihoods and natural resource management. We look at women's safety and security. And then we have a cross-cutting approach which acknowledges women's right to education and information and women's right to
economic empowerment.
Health and well-being. No, economic empowerment is a goal in itself, certainly. And when we talk about women's safety and security as well, we're addressing a spectrum there too. We're not just looking at the devastating effects of violence against women on a more domestic front, but we're talking about national security as well and finding women a place at the table in terms of peace building and conflict resolution at that very macro level.
How do you feel that the work you're doing in those countries benefits women everywhere?
Well, they're global issues. Women's rights and women's equality is something that needs to be addressed in every organisation, in every country, in every place in the world. And we believe that by bringing resources and momentum to what is essentially a women's movement, we can address the inequality. We choose to focus entirely around a poverty setting because we believe it's important to work with the most marginalised and with the most vulnerable. However, there's no distinction on that. Vulnerability exists everywhere. And so we're resourcing coalitions, we're resourcing communications mechanisms in addition to our education and development and economic empowerment work that allows us to bring women and girls together from across regions and across nations.
Well, that brings me to my next question is, how do we, as women living in Western countries, support the work that you're doing?
There's so many ways, Suzi. At the individual level, people can volunteer their time. We welcome everyone's skills and experience. Let's bring out the strengths that we have and try and link that with some of our programming. So volunteers are very, very welcome. Fundraising is an important area for us. We need to grow and we need to expand and we need to deepen the contacts that we have and the programs that we're trying to implement. So there's a range of fundraising options, anything from sponsorship of events for us through to individual donations, which people can follow the channels for if they look at our website. But also just participation is really important, you know, sharing the voice of women and joining in meetings and forums and events that do raise these issues about women's lives. And we welcome people's participation in that. On March the 8th is actually the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. We've achieved a great deal in 100 years, although I do note that the first female gondolier in Venice was only appointed this year after something like 900 years, so some things take longer. But it is an important day next year, and we hope that women around Australia will join us in celebrating all that we have done and will continue to do together.
Thank you for the inspiring work that you do, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Suzi.
Thank you.